The morning I came home from my brother's place in Tucson, I noticed the front door was a different color. I stood at the end of the driveway for a moment, my travel bag in hand, just staring. The door had been red for 31 years. My late wife, Carol, had chosen that color herself, a deep, warm red she called barn cherry. She'd spent 2 weekends stripping the old white paint, sanding it down, and applying 3 careful coats. She said a red door meant welcome. She said it meant the people inside were glad you came. Now it was gray, a flat, corporate gray, the kind you see on every new construction subdivision from here to the coast. I told myself maybe the light was playing tricks. The sun was already high, and I'd been driving since 4 in the morning. I walked up the path slowly, noticing that Carol's flower beds along the front walkway had been dug up. The lavender she'd planted the spring before she got sick, all of it gone. In its place was a row of those low ornamental grasses that look like they belong in front of a bank. Neat, sterile, saying nothing to anyone. I unlocked the front door, or I tried to. The key didn't turn. I stood there, on my own porch, in front of my own door, with my own key, and it didn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. I pulled out my phone and called my son. It rang 4 times before he picked up. "Hey, Dad, you back already?" "My key doesn't work," I said. A pause. "Oh, yeah. We had the locks changed. Security thing. I'll come let you in." He said it the way you'd say, "I moved the remote to the other drawer." Casual. Matter of fact. Like it was a small thing that required no explanation beyond the 3 words he'd already given. I sat down on the porch step and waited. I'm 64 years old and I've worked hard my entire adult life. I spent 38 years as a civil engineer, built roads and bridges in 4 states, raised a son mostly on my own after Carol passed, and paid off this house 14 years ago. The deed has my name on it. Only my name. I want you to remember that. My son, Ryan, opened the door about 10 minutes later. He looked tired and a little sheepish, which I recognized as the look he gets when he knows he's done something wrong but has already decided not to apologize for it. "Sorry about that, Dad. Come on in." I walked in. I almost walked back out. The living room wall between the kitchen and the den, the wall I had Carol's mother's china cabinet against for 20 years, was gone. Just gone. In its place was an open floor plan, the kind that looks good in magazines but means you can hear every sound in the kitchen while you're trying to watch television. The crown molding Carol and I had installed ourselves one long summer weekend gone. New recessed lighting where the ceiling fan used to be. The hardwood floors, original oak that the previous owners had laid in 1958, had been covered over with wide plank laminate in a pale washed color that looked like it was trying to be Scandinavian. The furniture was different. Not some of it. All of it. The leather armchair I'd had for 20 years, the one with the slight indent on the left armrest from where I always rested my elbow, gone. The bookshelves Carol built from solid walnut, gone. The framed photographs on the staircase wall, gone, replaced by a series of abstract prints in matching frames, the kind that come in a 3-pack from a home decor store. I stood in the middle of what used to be my living room, and I said nothing for a long time. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs, and my daughter-in-law came down. My son had married her 2 years ago. She was pleasant enough in small doses, sharp, ambitious, the kind of person who treats every conversation like a negotiation and every silence like a problem to be solved. From the beginning, she had looked at this house the way a developer looks at a vacant lot. She had opinions about everything. The curtains were dated. The kitchen was inefficient. The bathroom tile was a lot. I had smiled and nodded and kept my thoughts to myself because she was my son's wife and I was trying to be a decent father-in-law. She came down the stairs in a linen blazer and bare feet, holding a coffee mug that had a word on it I didn't recognize. She smiled when she saw me, a wide, practiced smile. "Frank, you're back. What do you think?" "Where is my furniture?" I asked. "We donated most of it," she said, still smiling. The pieces that were salvageable went to a resale shop on Clearwater. The rest, honestly, Frank, some of it was just worn out. We got a great deal on the new pieces. The couch is from a boutique place in the design district. Real quality. "You donated my furniture." It was time for an update. This house has so much potential, and honestly, the old layout was just, where are Carol's bookshelves? The smile flickered. Just for a second. The walnut ones? They were in rough shape, Frank. Where are they? Ryan stepped forward. Dad, they were water damaged along the bottom. They were not water damaged. I sealed that wood every 2 years. Where are they? Silence. Gone, my daughter-in-law said finally, setting her mug down on a counter that also wasn't there before. White marble, very sleek. I'm sorry. I know it's a lot to come home to. But once you settle in, you'll see how much better it flows. I looked at my son. He was looking at the floor. Where did you get the money for this? I asked. We'll talk about it later, Ryan said. You just got home. Sit down, I'll make you some coffee. I asked you a question. He looked up then, and I saw something in his face that I hadn't expected. Not guilt, exactly. Something more complicated than guilt. Something that looked almost like calculation. We'll talk about it later, he said again. I went upstairs. My bedroom, at least, had not been touched, probably because I'd been sleeping in it up until 3 weeks ago when I left for Tucson. My brother had needed help after a hip replacement, and I'd gone out to stay with him and do the cooking and driving. 3 weeks. I had been gone 3 weeks. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around the room at the only things left in this house that still looked like mine. The quilt Carol made the winter she was pregnant with Ryan. The photograph of the two of us on our wedding day, slightly tilted in its frame. The old wooden clock on the nightstand that had belonged to her father. I felt something very cold settle in my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something more like clarity. I'd had a feeling before I left. I want to be honest about that. I'd had a feeling that something wasn't right. That the way my daughter-in-law had been asking questions about the house, about the square footage, the market value, the age of the roof was not the idle curiosity of someone who wanted to redecorate. I hadn't been able to name what was wrong. I just knew something was. So before I left for Tucson, I had done something. I'd installed cameras. 3 of them, 1 in the living room covering the main entry, 1 in the kitchen, and 1 small one in the hallway, outside what used to be my home office. I'd used a brand my nephew recommended, the kind that stores footage on a cloud server. I hadn't said anything to anyone. I'd positioned them behind plants and on the top shelves of cabinets, places I knew my daughter-in-law wouldn't think to look because they were too high up to affect her vision of the space. I had 37 days of footage waiting for me. I didn't look at it that night. I unpacked my bag, made myself dinner in a kitchen I barely recognized, and went to bed early. Ryan and my daughter-in-law moved around downstairs, talking in low voices. Once I heard her laugh, that bright, confident laugh she has, and then I heard her say something I couldn't make out, followed by his lower voice, apologetic sounding, trailing off. I lay in the dark, and I thought about Carol. I thought about how she used to say that this house was the one thing she was sure of, that no matter what happened in the world, the house would be there, and it would be ours. I thought about the 31 years of living that were embedded in these walls, in the floors, in the trim around the windows that we'd repainted together every 7 years like clockwork. I thought about Ryan as a boy, running through the hallways, scratching his initials into the back of the closet door in his bedroom when he was 9, the scratch still there that I'd never had the heart to sand away. Then I thought about what my daughter-in-law had said. So much potential. I fell asleep with that cold thing still sitting in my chest. The next morning, while they were both still asleep, I made coffee and opened my laptop at the kitchen counter. I logged into the camera server and started watching. The first few days after I left were unremarkable. Ryan went to work. My daughter-in-law worked from home, taking calls in the den. Normal enough. On day 4, a man I didn't recognize came to the house. He walked through every room with my daughter-in-law, taking photographs on his phone and making notes on a clipboard. He spent a long time in the kitchen and the living room, measuring things with a laser level. Before he left, I watched my daughter-in-law hand him a folder. He looked at the papers inside and nodded. I paused the footage and sat with that for a moment. Then I kept watching. On day 6, 2 men arrived with a truck and began removing furniture. My daughter-in-law directed them with the energy of someone who had been planning this for a long time. She stood in the middle of the living room, pointing. That. Not that one yet, we'll do that later. Carol's bookshelves went out on day 6, mid-afternoon. 2 men carrying them out the front door while my daughter-in-law held it open and smiled her wide, practiced smile. On day 9, the contractors arrived. 3 of them. They knocked out the wall. I had to stop watching at that point and walk outside for a few minutes. When I came back, I skipped forward. I watched the floors go in. I watched the new furniture arrive, piece by piece, all of it chosen and approved by my daughter-in-law, none of it discussed with me. I watched Ryan come home from work each evening, walk through the changes, and say things I couldn't make out through the audio, but that looked from his body language like mild approval, or maybe just acceptance. He never looked uncomfortable. He never looked like a man who was thinking about his father. But it was day 12 that changed everything. On day 12, a different man came to the house, older, in a suit. He sat down at the new kitchen counter with my daughter-in-law and spread papers between them. I could see from the camera angle that some of the papers had official-looking headers, though I couldn't read the text. My daughter-in-law had a pen in her hand. The man pointed to several places on different pages. She nodded and signed. Then she picked up her phone and called Ryan. I watched her talk, watched her laugh once, watched her look around the renovated kitchen with the expression of someone surveying something that belongs to them. I stopped the footage. I opened a new browser tab and called my attorney. His name was Gerald, and I had used him for various legal matters over the years: the estate when Carol passed, a boundary dispute with a neighbor a decade ago, the refinancing I'd done in 2018. He picked up on the second ring because Gerald always picks up on the second ring. It's one of the things I appreciate about him. "Frank," he said, "what's going on?" I told him about coming home. I told him about the door, the furniture, the wall, the floors. I told him about the camera footage and the man in the suit and the papers. I told him that my daughter-in-law had signed something and that my son had been on the phone immediately after. Gerald was quiet for a moment. "Do you have any joint accounts with your son?" he asked. "No." "Is his name on the deed?" "No, just mine." "Has he ever had power of attorney?" "No." "All right," Gerald said. "I need you to pull your credit report today, all 3 bureaus, and I need you to go to the county recorder's office and pull any documents filed on your property in the last 60 days. "You think someone filed something on my property?" "I think you should find out," he said carefully. "And Frank, don't say anything at home yet. Go about your day normally. Can you do that?" I told him I could. I went to the county recorder's office that same morning, while Ryan was at work and my daughter-in-law was on a call. I told her I was going to pick up some things from the hardware store. She smiled and said okay without looking up from her laptop. It took the clerk about 8 minutes to pull everything up. There were 2 documents filed on my property in the previous 40 days. The first was a recorded lien for the renovation work. It was in my name, or rather, it purported to be signed by me. A home improvement lien for $42,000 secured against the property. I had not signed any lien. I had not authorized any renovation. I had not been in this state on the date the document was notarized. I had been in Tucson. My brother could confirm that. His doctor could confirm that. The gas station receipts I'd kept out of habit could confirm that. The second document was a preliminary title change application. My son's name had been added as a co-owner on the property. Again, bearing my signature. Again, notarized on a date I was in Tucson. I stood at the clerk's counter and read both documents twice. My hands were steady. I noticed that, distantly, that my hands were not shaking. The cold thing in my chest had moved, settled somewhere deeper, become something very still and very certain. I made copies of everything and called Gerald from the parking lot. He listened to me read him the key details from both documents, and then he was quiet again for a slightly longer moment. "Frank," he said, "what you're describing is felony forgery, potentially fraud. This is not a family disagreement anymore." "I know. What do you want to do?" I thought about Ryan as a 9-year-old, scratching his initials into the back of a closet door. I thought about his face when I'd asked about the money, that complicated look that wasn't quite guilt. I thought about my daughter-in-law signing papers at my kitchen counter with the expression of someone taking inventory of their own property. I want it undone, I said. All of it, properly and legally. And after that, I thought about Carol's red door. I thought about the lavender along the front walk. I thought about 31 years of a life built in a specific place by specific people who loved each other and took care of what they built. After that, I said, I want them out of my house. I want to be clear about something. I did not go home that afternoon and confront anyone. I know that's not what some people would have done. I know some people would have walked in and laid it all out on the table right then and there, raised their voice, demanded explanations. I understand that impulse. I felt it. But I learned a long time ago from Carol, actually, who was the calmest person I have ever known, that the best time to act is not when you're still absorbing the blow. The best time to act is after you've understood exactly what happened, exactly what you want, and exactly how to get it. Act in anger, and you give the other person the thing they need most, which is to make the story about your reaction instead of their actions. So I went home. I made sandwiches for lunch. My daughter-in-law came and sat at the new kitchen counter and talked about the renovation in the tone of someone expecting compliments, and I said it was a lot to take in and asked her how she'd found the contractors. She gave me a name, perfectly casually, the way you do when you haven't done anything you're ashamed of. That told me something about how she saw the situation, that she had convinced herself, somehow, that this was all reasonable, that she had done nothing wrong, that the only issue was me being sentimental about old furniture. I ate my sandwich and nodded at appropriate intervals. Over the next 4 days, Gerald moved quickly. He filed to have the fraudulent lien voided. He filed to contest the title change. He contacted a forensic document examiner who confirmed within 48 hours that the signatures on both documents were not consistent with my known handwriting samples. He also pulled the notary's records and found that the notary in question had been disciplined twice before for irregular practices, meaning we had a very clear picture of how this had been accomplished. On day 4, Gerald called and told me everything was in order. He told me that what had been done was serious enough that criminal charges were a realistic possibility. He said that was my decision to make, and he would support whatever I decided. He also told me that he had taken the liberty of drafting a document, a formal notice of trespass and unauthorized alteration that would, if served, require Ryan and my daughter-in-law to vacate the property within 30 days. I asked him to have it ready. That evening, Ryan came home from work to find me sitting in the living room. I had moved one of the new chairs to face the front door, which I thought was appropriate. My daughter-in-law was upstairs. I'd heard her up there for most of the afternoon, moving around, talking on the phone. Ryan came in and saw me sitting there and stopped. "Hey, Dad, what are you?" "Sit down, Ryan." He sat down on the new couch. It was, objectively, a nice couch. I noticed that even in that moment, I placed the copies of both documents on the coffee table and slid them toward him. He looked at them for a long time without touching them. "I need you to tell me whether you knew about these before they were filed," I said, "or after." He didn't say anything. "Ryan, before," he said quietly. "I knew before." Something shifted in the room. I had been hoping, in some part of myself I hadn't fully acknowledged, that he was going to tell me he hadn't known, that he was going to look at those papers with genuine shock, that my daughter-in-law had done this alone, without him. I'd been hoping that since the moment I'd stood in that parking lot at the recorder's office with the papers in my hand. He didn't give me that. "She said it was just paperwork," he said. "She said it was to protect the investment in the renovation. She said you'd be fine with it once you saw what she'd done to the place. She said I'd be fine with a forged signature on a lien against my property." He winced. "Did you sign anything?" I asked. "The title thing. The one adding my name. You signed a document that required my signature, which you knew I hadn't given." He put his face in his hands. "I am not a man who enjoys watching his son suffer. I want to be clear about that too. Whatever I felt sitting across from him in that moment, it was not satisfaction. It was something closer to grief, a very specific kind of grief that comes from realizing that a person you raised and loved and tried your best for has made himself into someone you don't fully recognize." "She told me it was a common arrangement," he said, still not looking up. She said lots of couples do it when they're living with a parent, just to have some security. She said, "She forged my signature," I said. "That is a crime. That is not a common arrangement. And you signed a document that depended on that forgery, which makes you part of it." He looked up then. "Are you going to press charges?" I had thought about this for 4 days. I had turned it over every way I could think of. I had thought about what Carol would have said. I had thought about what it would mean for Ryan's career, his future, what it would follow him for years, the way things like this do. I had thought about the fact that he was still my son regardless of what he had done, and that I had spent his entire childhood trying to teach him the difference between right and wrong, and that apparently some of that hadn't taken the way I'd hoped. But some of it had, because he'd said before without lying to me, and he hadn't tried to talk his way out of it. "Not if everything is reversed and corrected within 10 days, I said. The lien voided. The title change rescinded. Every document. Gerald has the paperwork. Your wife needs to sign all of it." He nodded slowly. And then I reached into the folder beside my chair and placed Gerald's notice on the table. "Then I need you both to find somewhere else to live. You have 30 days. He stared at the notice. He read it twice. I watched him. "Dad, this is my house, Ryan. It has been my house for 31 years. Your mother and I built a life here. I let you move in because you asked me to, and because I thought it might be good for both of us. And instead, you let your wife knock down walls and rip out floors and remove every piece of furniture your mother ever touched. And then you stood by while she put a forged lien against the one thing I have left that she built with me. My voice stayed even the whole time. I am proud of that. I'm not doing this in anger. I'm doing this because it's the right thing for everyone, including you." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She's going to fight this. She is welcome to try. She has a lawyer already," she said. He stopped. "She said what?" He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was about 12 years old and had broken something valuable and was deciding whether to lie. He chose not to lie then, and he chose not to lie now. "She said once her name was on the deed, it would be easier to eventually move you somewhere more manageable." I let that sit in the air between us. Somewhere more manageable, 64 years old, full health, no cognitive decline, completely capable of running my own affairs. And someone had looked at me and decided I needed to be moved somewhere more manageable. Decided that without consulting me, without speaking to me. Decided it and then started taking steps toward it while I was in Tucson, making soup for my brother and helping him to physical therapy appointments 3 times a week. "More manageable?" I said. Ryan's face had gone pale. I think hearing it out loud, in the context of everything else, was clarifying something for him that had been murky before. I didn't think she meant, "I think you knew exactly what she meant," I said quietly, "and you decided it was more important to keep peace in your marriage than to be honest with your father. And I understand that. Marriage is hard, and it requires compromise, and sometimes you make choices you're not proud of, because the immediate cost of not making them feels too high." I stood up. But this is where it ends. I walked upstairs and left him sitting there with the documents. The next morning, my daughter-in-law came to find me in the kitchen before Ryan was up. She was composed, dressed, in full control of herself. She sat down across from me at the her kitchen counter, as she'd been treating it, and she folded her hands and looked at me. "I think we should talk about this like adults," she said. "I'm happy to do that. The renovation adds significant value to this property. Comparable homes in this neighborhood have sold recently for... I don't want to sell this home. But if you did..." "I don't." She recalibrated. I watched her do it. Ryan and I have invested real money and real time into this house. I think it's reasonable to expect some acknowledgement of that. "The lien would have addressed that," I said, "except that I didn't authorize the lien, and the signature on it isn't mine." A pause. Very brief, but there. "I think there may have been some miscommunication about..." "There was no miscommunication," I said. "I was in Tucson. You know I was in Tucson. The notary stamped that document on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at my brother's cardiologist appointment. I have the appointment confirmation in my email. Gerald has copies of everything." She looked at me for a long moment. The composure was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want the lien voided. I want the title change rescinded. I want you both out of my house in 30 days. I want a written accounting of every item removed from this property during the renovation so I can determine what, if anything, can be recovered." I paused. "And I want you to understand that if any of that is contested, Gerald files the criminal referral on Monday." She stood up. Her hands were still folded, but there was a tension in her arms now, a stillness that was the opposite of calm. "You do that to your own son. Ryan will not be charged if he cooperates fully and completely, which he has already indicated he will. That was a condition I was able to offer because he was honest with me last night." I looked at her. "You might think about what that means." She left the kitchen without saying anything else. 3 days later, she signed everything Gerald put in front of her. Every document. The forensic examiner's report had apparently been shared with her own attorney, and her attorney had given her the same advice any competent attorney would give. Cooperate, correct, and be grateful no criminal charges are being filed. Ryan stayed to help with some of the correction paperwork. He and I sat at the kitchen counter several evenings in a row, going through things, and we talked more honestly during those evenings than we had in years. I learned things about his marriage that I hadn't known. I learned that the renovation had been her idea from the first week they moved in, that she had presented it to him as a gift, as something she wanted to do for me, and that by the time Ryan understood what it actually was, the project was already underway, and she had convinced him it was too late to stop it. I learned that the forged documents had been presented to him as a technicality, something her lawyer had supposedly said was standard practice, and that Ryan, who is not a stupid man but is, I understand now, a man who wants very badly to believe the person he loves is trustworthy, had accepted that at face value. I don't excuse him. I want to be honest about that too. A man is responsible for what he chooses not to look at. But I understood him better than I had before, and understanding is not the same as excusing, but it is something. On the last day of the 30-day period, I watched them load a moving truck. My daughter-in-law worked quickly and efficiently, directing everything with the same energy she'd had when she was moving furniture out. Ryan carried boxes. He didn't say much. At one point, he came inside to get a glass of water and stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the renovated space. "I'm sorry about Mom's bookshelves," he said. "Specifically those. I should have stopped that." "Yes," I said. "You should have." He nodded. He drank his water. He put the glass in the sink. Before they drove away, he came and found me on the back porch, where I'd been sitting most of the afternoon. The yard was the one thing that hadn't been touched. Carol's rose garden was still there. Along the back fence, the front lavender was gone, but the roses were untouched, probably because they were too far from the house to figure into whatever plans had been made for the interior. I'd been sitting, looking at them. "Can I come visit?" he asked. I looked at him. My son. 51 years of knowing this person. Carrying him home from the hospital, teaching him to ride a bike on this same back patio, watching him graduate, watching him marry, watching him make this specific and serious mistake. "When things are settled," I said, "give it some time." "Then yes." He nodded. "I mean it," he said. I'm sorry. I know that probably doesn't fix anything." "It doesn't fix anything," I agreed. "But it's not nothing." He left. I sat on the porch for a long time after the truck was gone. The afternoon light came through the rose canes at a low angle, the way it does in October, making everything look a little golden and a little sad at the same time. I thought about Carol. I thought about how she would have handled all of this probably with considerably more grace than I had, though I hope I'd done reasonably well. She had a saying she used whenever something painful ended. "Now you know where you stand." It wasn't cynical. She meant it practically. Knowing where you stand is the beginning of knowing what to do next. Now I knew where I stood. The house was quiet. The floors were wrong and the wall was gone and the furniture was not mine. But the house was quiet and mine, and that was the beginning. I called Gerald the next morning to confirm everything was properly recorded and filed. "You handled that well," he said. "Carol would have handled it better." "Probably," he said, because Gerald knew Carol and knew this was true. "But you handled it." I spent the following weeks slowly reclaiming the space. I didn't rush it. I went to estate sales on Saturday mornings looking for furniture that had the same weight and solidity as what had been taken. I found a walnut sideboard at a sale in Millbrook that reminded me of Carol's bookshelves, not the same, but the same quality, the same sense of something built to last. I put it against the wall where her bookshelves had been and stood back and looked at it. Not the same, but something. I found a paint color at the hardware store called Orchard Red. Not Barn Cherry, that specific paint had been discontinued years ago, but close. Close enough that when I applied the first coat to the front door on a cool Saturday morning in November, with the light coming at that low, October-going November angle, it looked like something returning, not restored, exactly. Something that had survived and was starting again. I planted lavender along the front walk in the spring. It took a season to establish, the way lavender does. But by summer, it was beginning to fill in. Ryan called on a Tuesday evening in February. We talked for about an hour. He had moved into an apartment and was, from what I could tell, working through things. His marriage was struggling. I didn't ask for details, and he didn't offer many. He asked about the house, and I told him about the door and the sideboard, and he was quiet for a moment and then said that sounded right. I think he meant it. I told him what I should have told him a long time ago. That I loved him, that love has a shape, and that shape includes limits, that the limits exist not to punish anyone, but because without them, love becomes something else, something more like accommodation, something that asks everyone in it to disappear a little. He said he understood. I'm not sure he fully did, not yet. But he's not a bad man, my son. He made serious choices, and they had serious consequences. And now he's living in the middle of those consequences and learning what they weigh. That's not nothing either. That's actually how most of the important learning happens, not in the moment you're told something is wrong, but in the long, quiet aftermath of finding out for yourself. The house is mine. It was always mine. It will be mine until I decide otherwise. And I will decide otherwise when and how I choose. And it will reflect 31 years of Carol and me, and some years of just me, and all the things we put into it, and all the things it held for us. Some mornings I come downstairs and the light is just right, the early light, coming through the east window in the kitchen and falling across the counter at a long angle, and I make my coffee, and I stand there for a moment, in the quiet, before the day begins, and I think about what she would say about all of it. I think she would say, "Now you know where you stand." And then she would pick up her coffee and look out the window at the yard, and we would stand there together for a while in the good morning quiet, and that would be enough. That was always enough. If any of this sounds familiar, if you've felt the thing I felt standing at the end of that driveway looking at a door that was the wrong color, then you know that some things are worth the fight. Not the loud fight. The quiet, careful, legal, documented, completely resolute fight that ends with you exactly where you were always supposed to be. Home.